Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This is Denizens of the Astral Plane. Before we get into it, just want to mention Patreon if you'd like to support the important work of Astral Club, spreading information about the astral plane and astral projection. You can do so with a link in the description. And when you join Patreon, you get a library of downloaded episodes that you can put on your podcast app. There's no commercials. There's an email where we can talk back and forth. And you get your advanced videos on Sunday. Next up, private lessons. I'm running a spring special right now for anyone who's interested. All you have to do is go to the description. There's an email there and request information and mention the spring special. Okay, let's get started. Denizens of the Astral Plane. It's funny, I was writing down all my notes for what I was going to talk about, and then on a lark, I just decided to do what I rarely do, which is go on the internet, because whenever I do that, I'm usually disappointed. I get a little angry because I usually find lots of websites full of misinformation, obviously written by someone who has no idea what they're talking about. But in this case, I was pleasantly surprised. And I ran across a website that has a weird name, streetdirectory.com. And he wrote this, those amazing creatures, denizens of the astral plane. And when I looked at it, it was almost a complete match for the notes that I had already jotted down in my scrawl, which is otherwise known as writing. And I said, well, heck, I'm just going to use this because it's pretty much exactly what I was going to talk about anyway. So this guy obviously knows what he's talking about. Because, you know, there's nothing here that I have to laugh at or what have you. So what I'd like to do is just kind of get into it then. He lists a number of entities, and this is what I'm going to talk about. First is human, then sleepers, which I call sleepwalkers, then conscious astral travelers, dead people, those who've moved from the physical plane, non-humans, fairies and nature spirits, astral bodies of animals, angels and other celestial beings, and those are at the higher levels, demons, which are at the lower levels, and artificial entities or elementals or thought forms. So let's elaborate a little bit. The first one was human. That's a pretty straightforward description. You can meet other humans on the astral plane, and it's a fascinating experience. They're projectors, they're aware, and you can meet with them. I've had some travels. I mentioned an experience I had when I was 16 with a mother of one of my friends who was an astral projector, and also my girlfriend in college. I remember telling you about that as well. Next up is what he calls sleepers. Now, I call them sleepwalkers. I've been calling them that since I was a kid because they reminded me of sleepwalkers. Now, these are people who are untrained in the art of astral projection. They're basically dreaming more or less unconsciously, and they're wondering about, usually it's the lower astral plane, in a daze. If you meet them, and I have approached them, especially when I was a child, because I was trying to get their attention. And normally they would just wander about aimlessly, sometimes floating along with the astral breeze. They generally don't recognize you. They're literally like sleepwalkers. And for the most part, my guess is that the next morning, they either remember my experience with them as a dream of some sort, or they have no recollection whatsoever. And this is one of the reasons why I've mentioned in the past that trying to take people out of their body in my Astral Uber episode is possible, but it's also a waste of time because it's the equivalent of leading along a sleepwalker on a journey. It's a complete waste of time. Next up, of course, they have a subcategory here of conscious astral traveler, which doesn't necessarily have to be human, but on Earth, most of the astral travelers you're going to meet, the conscious ones, are going to be naturally humans. And of course, it's pretty self-explanatory. These are generally people who have proceeded on an advanced spiritual path and have gained the ability to project consciously onto the astral plane. Next up, dead. Well, of course, dead is a misnomer. No one really dies. The physical body, just like an old car, when no longer useful, is simply discarded. The soul, that is the driver of the body, continues. These folks who are wondering about, let's say, in the lower astral, may be those who've newly passed on, and generally it's because they're still mourning, and they're still held to the lower astral, which is somewhat normal for the average human being. I've often said that the best time to contact deceased relatives is within the first month or so of human time, because that's when they're the closest, the most attuned to the physical plane. They're in the process of cutting the various ties and saying goodbye. Of course, there's also those who passed suddenly and tragically, and for a time are unaware what has happened to them, and they're confused. And in their confused state, it can be very difficult to help these people. I've tried helping a number of folks that I found over the years, some who died by road accidents, and they were just confused why people weren't perceiving them. And it was even hard for me to get their attention because they were so caught up in their grief and their confusion. But luckily, eventually, they ask for help. And as soon as they send out that call for help generally arrives pretty quickly. Next up, let's talk about the non-human. In the astral, there are entities that were never human and never will be, for they belong to an entirely different order of nature. For example, fairies and nature spirits. Some of these nature spirits inhabit streams, rocks, mountains, and forests. Now, there's a lot less of them nowadays because our human civilization has encroached upon their living space. There's folklore about these entities in every culture on Earth. They have a variety of appearances. Generally, their intelligence is not up to human standards, but they're very close and very protective of their natural inhabited places. So if you want to encounter them, you must do so very respectfully and very gently, because they're also very skittish around humans, and I think you can understand why they would be skittish. But if you want to meet them, you need to be in nature, preferably in nature that is far away from human habitation. They're not outright hostile in my experience. They sometimes are a little pranksters, almost like children playing good-natured pranks. And if you can win their trust, they can be a little friend for you. And in mythology, they've been called by a wide variety of names, from fairies to pixies, elves, brownies, jinns, trolls, satyrs, fauns, kobolds, imps, goblins, little folk, tiny people, gnomes, sylphs, undines, and salamanders, etc. Next up, the astral bodies of animals. Animals that are wild share a group soul. When they pass, they return to that group soul and then are eventually recycled into new bodies, generally of the same species. However, animals that have had close association with humans, pets, in other words, they can actually develop an individuated soul apart from the overall oversoul of their species. Cats and dogs are particularly good examples. Although I see more dogs than I do cats. I think dogs have had a very long experience with humans and a close association with us, going back 40,000 years or so. Cats, on the other hand, pretty much started hanging around humans when the Egyptians started building large granaries, some thousands of years ago. And the cats, of course, were attracted to the rats. And the Egyptians loved the cats. I mean, really loved cats. And of course, these cats would eat the rats and therefore protect the grain. And of course, over a long period of time, eventually the cats would adopt humans as their pets, and an association would begin. When there is a very close and friendly association with a human or humans, they can develop an individuated soul. And I've told you about the time that I saw my dog, who had passed some decades before. Her astral body was becoming very indistinct, but she was still hanging around our home. She was used to sleeping with my mother and was continuing to do that. And my mother even told me once that she kind of felt her presence sometimes at night. And I don't think it's not unusual for them to hang out and wait for their favorite human to pass as well. Heck, we've seen instances of animals who occupy grave sites when their loved owner dies. Most particularly dogs in that case, I believe. But I've also seen some spirits of cats, though, too. But they tend to be a lot more mobile and more scarce than the dog spirits that I have seen. Next up, angels. Now, angels are very rare on the lower and middle astral realms. Typically, you encounter them on the higher realms. And I've made some videos about them before, so I'm not going to get into a huge amount of detail here. Angels are entities that are a class outside of humans. They have never been human. They are a highly intelligent group of beings that are generally very positively disposed to assisting humans in evolution, in getting higher and higher in their spirituality. They can be harsh because they aren't necessarily very emotional. They don't share a lot of our typical emotions, and they don't know what it's like to be human. Now, if you have a long association with one, much like I have with my angel guide, some of my bad habits, for instance, have rubbed off on him. I think he even has a little bit of a sense of humor now, and it's kind of dry like mine, so we get along well together. Next up, we've got the demons. Now, these are obviously entities of a lower order. They can be found in the lower astral, but they're still pretty rare typically. Unless you go looking for them, you generally aren't going to find them because they've got other missions to do than be concerned with some odd astral projector who's just running around minding his own business. They are hostile. Well, they're anywhere from neutral to hostile. Basically, they're kind of like, for the most part, I find, very touchy neighbor types. In other words, if you don't bother them and stay out of their way, they won't go out of their way to mess with you. However, if you think you're powerful and you try to, interfere with them or mess with them, then you may get more than you bargained for. Their intelligence varies widely, from anywhere from basically someone who has the intelligence of an 8-year-old to extremely intelligent beings who you would not wish to match wits with. And if you do, and I have played with this a little bit, and I don't recommend it, but only after years of study was I even foolish enough to try to contact one, because they will lay subtle traps for those who they think are worth trapping and who think that they're smarter than them. So stay clear. Unless you want to do years of study and risk your well-being, stay well clear of them, and they'll stay well clear of you. Artificial entities or elementals. These are beings that have been formed by the power of generally human thought or emotion. These are artificial entities that aren't born naturally, but they're creations of our minds, the minds of humans. People who manifest strong desires accompanied by definite mental pictures of what they desire can create the majority of these elementals or thought forms unconsciously. Many have learned the art of consciously creating them, either for good or bad. Strong wishes for good, as well as strong curses for evil, can manifest in the astral. But such thought forms are under the law of thought attraction, and they go where they are attracted. So be careful of your thoughts during your projections, because now you're in the astral, and any signals you send out are infinitely clearer and much more powerful than the average human who is trapped inside his physical body. Well, that is a quick overview of some of the entities or denizens that you might find while traveling on the astral plane. If you like this, please hit the like button, share it with those of like minds, subscribe if you haven't already, and 87% of you have already subscribed. It's funny, I see channels that say, hey, we got 10% subscribed, let's get more. So I can't complain too much. But if you haven't subscribed, just hit the button and make sure that bell is solid so you get notified when there's Wednesday and Saturday new episodes. Please leave your questions and comments. Have you seen any of these creatures yourself? If so, let me know your experiences in the comments. And as always, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.